Hello and welcome to my painting video. I'm flashing my subject matter and my palette and also some of the pre-work I did with a preliminary sketch. This is a Study the Greats episode focusing on Cullen Yates, who was a Northeast Pennsylvania-based painter stationed out of Shawnee on the Delaware here in Monroe County, near the heart of the Poconos. We're going to be doing a study of a painting that very much had tonalist qualities, like many of his contemporaries from the turn of the century. Cullen Yates was an artist or a painter who was multifaceted. However, he tended to focus on rivers, mountain scenes, landscapes in the rural setting that he lived in Shawnee on the Delaware. He also did some wonderful still lifes as well. In this painting, I'm not sure where the location was, but I imagine it wasn't too far from his home in Shawnee, which is not far from Delaware Water Gap, probably about 3 or 4 miles away. So there's some tall mountains and rolling hills and pastoral scenes that are within a hiking distance. So I imagine this is probably one of those locations. This is a scene that is a sunset-based scene, silhouette. So most of the foreground and the trees in the midground are going to be in full shadow, at least to varying degrees. Well, this video is about 11 minutes long, and it's played at 8 times normal speed. I do have a longer, full-length tutorial video that's available initially on my Patreon page. Probably will be available publicly to all within a week or so from its publishing on Patreon. So you see, much like the painters of the past, I'll be using many varied tools in order to get the desired effects. Anything ranging from a palette knife to a paintbrush, to my fingers, to paper towel, and so on and so forth. And I'll take the time to put paint down with my brush or whatever tool I'm using and wipe it up with the paper towel. And I'll use that for various reasons, including, creating the effects of thinning tree branches and leaves at the end of the tree. I'll also use it to help ensure there's not too much paint on the surface as I try to layer in additional colors. This painting is going to be completed on a 5x7 wood panel that I made, and there's 3 layers of gesso. I sanded in between each layer and then added an additional coat of some leftover paint, very thin coat, let it dry. And in this case, it was a mixture of yellow ochre and burnt umber. Mostly yellow ochre, though. You'll be able to view the final painting on my website at thomasmichaelneiman.com. If you're interested, you can check it out there. I'll post a final copy of the painting. In this case, I will work this painting wet on wet in one sitting, let it dry, and like I do with most of my paintings, I'll probably observe it in my studio for a while and decide whether or not to add some glazes and some scrumbles, to push the background back maybe a little bit further or intensify some of the light effects. We'll see. I think I'll probably get pretty close to finished 100% of the way, though. As this painting develops, it kind of evokes the feeling that I was hoping it would. It's much like the Cullen Yates painting called Sunset, however, just slightly ever so brighter than the original. I decided I'm going to read a poem that I had heard, I think, first a while back, but then was reminded of it while listening to Michael Mead's Living Myth podcast, called In a Dark Time by Fyodor Retke. In a dark time, the eye begins to see. I meet my shadow in the deepening shade. I hear my echo in the echoing wood. a lord of nature weeping to a tree. I live between the heroine and the wren, beasts of the hill and serpents of the den. What's madness but nobility of soul at odds with circumstance? The day's on fire. I know the purity of pure despair. My shadow pinned against the sweating wall. That place among the rocks. Is it a cave or a winding path? The edge is what I have. A steady storm of correspondences, a night flowing with birds and ragged moon, and in broad day the midnight come again. A man goes far to find out what he is, death of the self in a long, tearless night, all natural shapes blazing unnatural light. Dark, dark my light, and darker my desire, my soul, like some heat-maddened summer fly, keeps buzzing at the sill. Which is I, or which I is I? A fallen man, I climb out of my fear. The mind enters itself, and God, the mind, and one is one, free in the tearing wind. So, a couple of stanzas there. And, just happened to be listening to that podcast I mentioned earlier and heard this poem right around the time that I was doing this painting. And it just seemed like an odd moment of synchronicity there. And thought I would share it. So, back to Cullen Yates. I mentioned he was in northeast Pennsylvania where he lived for many years. I think he was born right around the 1840s or so, and lived to the 1860s, and lived into the 1940s. And he painted a lot of different subject matter, but his paintings all seem to be of high quality. The ones that stood out to me, as it always seems to be the case, were scenes like this one, which kind of bordered on tonalism. I've done a little bit of research. I reached out to the Historical Society here in Monroe County to see if I could find, any details or notes about his process, his painting practice, his studio. I haven't heard back yet, but I certainly hope to do more, incorporate more Cullen Yates works into my Study the Great series. So you see, started by slowly building layers upon layers, both in the silhouetted areas that were blocked in, which take up most of the painting, and the sky, going back and forth. You saw me just use my blending brush there, and now using the palette knife to create the illusion of additional details, some smaller tree trunks and branches and that sort of thing. Funny thing, when you look at the original painting, and I'm not sure if it'll be visible on screen at the end, but as this painting has started to dry, it almost appears as if there are two silhouetted people walking down this pathway. Kind of an eerie little happy accident, I guess. And there it is, mostly done. A couple of close-ups. Appreciate your time. Be well.